G'day everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Marek. We are doing a webinar today on looking at the seasonal update on pretty much how winter played out, how things are looking, and I'm going to touch on when to start irrigating. This is a series of webinars. One's very similar to what we've done in the past, but these ones have the Hub's jumped on board to fund this and fund the next 8 months to do a monthly webinar. So this will be the first of those. And yeah, we'll just be doing seasonal updates and having a bit of a topic around that irrigated agriculture as well on each step. So this is being recorded. So if you have to jump out, feel free to, if you need to go do something, feel free to jump out, and there will be a recording sent out later, and I think a podcast version as well. So we'll get started. All this moisture probe data is based on farming forecaster sites and AgLogic weather station sites. Where they are in the regions are based on representative soils and pasture types. As I said, they're a combination of AgLogic and farming forecaster sites. And where we put them in the landscape is on that dry side of average, so it kind of acts as an early warning system. So when you use this data and look at this data, it's just a reference to what you're seeing in the landscape, and it's a reference for your farm and understanding where it sits within the variability of your farm. So none of these probes are going to be sitting in a wet, flat part of the paddock that's probably underwater for you at the moment. This is an indication of when things are starting to kick off. But we'll talk about that as we go through. So essentially just a brief rundown, do this every time in terms of the things that affect soil moisture levels. Soil type's a big one, whether it's a lighter soil or a heavier clay affects the water holding capacity. So obviously your lighter sandier soils have a lower water holding capacity, and so that it means that they get full quicker essentially. So they're going to get full earlier on in the season, as opposed to a clay that needs more rainfall, winter rainfall to fill it up to its maximum water holding capacity. And it also affects infiltration, particularly as your soil dries out. Rainfall efficacy is also a factor that affects it. So is it a nice soaking rainfall or is it a heavy rainfall? This is really applicable when it comes to those dry parts in the season. And obviously location in terms of topography. Is it on the top of a hill, bottom of the hill? Where's the water running to? So understanding of your landscape, understanding your soil type is really key when it comes to trying to fit in this data into the landscape and the paddocks that you're looking at. So just a quick, this is one that I always forget because I live in this world of data. So I'll just give you a bit of a quick rundown of the graphs that we'll be looking at over the next 45 minutes. So if you look down here at the bottom, this is what we call a stacked graph. So this will either come in a 80 centimetre probe or a 120 centimetre probe. And essentially it is the probe has a sensor which does soil moisture and soil temperature at 10 centimetre intervals. So you can see that you've got 10 centimetres, 20, 30, 40, all the way down to 80. And what we have here is a slider bar that is labelled 10, and so in the 80 centimetre probe, 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 60 and 80. And what that is this point here is the fullest, is the plant, the most amount of water it can hold, plant available water, and when there's no plant available water, so you pick the high point and the low point. So that gives you a bit of indication as a sliding bar where that level's sitting. And this here is the sum graph. So this graph is the accumulation of all of these sensors into one line. And what we have here, as we collect more and more data, we're able to overlay that data on top of each other on a year-to-year basis. So this probe here was one of the first dryland probes that went in. So this blue line here is the last 12 months. So this point here is where we're sitting right now. The yellow line was last year, the green line the year before, and the grey line the 12 months previous to that. So as we collect more data, that just keeps overlaying as we go. So we'll get started and have a bit of a look around the state and see where things are at. So if we start in the northwest, this was the Montague around the Montague region. So what I've done also is I've taken the last time we did a webinar, which would have been back in March, mid-April. So this is where we were in mid-April. So for those of you who just had a conniption because they thought everything was dry, it's not the case. So that now is in that Montague area, and that circular head region is actually quite interesting. If you look at the ground, some areas are quite wet and others are not overly wet. So spoke to someone the other day who was putting in fence posts and they didn't seem to think it was so wet. But you have a look there, and so in that Montague region where you might have those some heavier soils and deeper soils, you can see here that we've kind of maxed our soil moisture with that last spring rainfall. But then if you go across the Woolnorth, they got a bit more rain at that part that in that July month that put them up a bit high, and we can see here that we're sitting at a full point for that period there. In terms of this part here is really important in terms of how we're going through the season. I've got a graph that will come up that really explains this concept of full point, but not just have we reached the full point, but how long have we been to that full point for? So this is a really good one in terms of 3 different years, where we hit that full point back in June 2 years ago. Last year, we only hit that full point, which would have been essentially a week ago, a year to the year, and this year about halfway in between. So this here really gives you a good indication of how long you're sitting in that wet zone. Is the plant drawing up moisture now? How quickly is it going to take off as things dry out? We've got a weather system coming through this weekend, so it's going to keep things pretty wet, but how soon a plant's going to respond once they get to that waterlogged state. If we then go to Edith Creek, it is wet. So there we go a bit further inland, higher rainfall, and they were sitting wet through there, but there is good plant growth. So if we go back to Woolnorth here, we can see that that's flatlining there. So in terms of yes, it's wet, but the plants aren't using the water up as much. But if we look here at that Edith Creek, we can see here where the rain's been falling, the water's been used up by the plant. So this gives us an early warning system. As soon as that wet spring period just finishes and the rain systems start to slow down, how quickly is our pasture going to respond? So we're sitting, wetter than we have been in the last couple of years, but it won't take long for things to take off. If we go a bit further south down to Yolla, same thing. We're sitting fairly similar at the same time we were last year, but you can see that water that's been taken up, that's falling, has been used by the plant. So we've got greater growth now than we would have, say, 2 years ago, where we get that early rainfall in the winter, but you can see that hasn't been matched with the plant growth. So so similar point, but it's that pattern that we really want to look at. So South Rona, this is the one that I want to kind of spend a bit of time on. So it looked similar to Yolla, but as you can see here, we hit that winter refill in June 2 years ago, and it just kind of sat there. We got rain that kept filling the profile up and keeping it full. Now, in terms of plant growth, that's restricted to plant growth because your plants are in a waterlogged state. But as you can see here, in a drier start to the winter, all that moisture is being used up. So your plants haven't stopped growth or haven't gone dormant because of waterlogging, and they're continuing to tick on. And that's really important here as temperatures start to increase. So once we go past that winter equinox and we start to see temperatures rising, we start to see day length increasing, we can start that's this August period here is where we start to see that unseasonal growth, I guess you can call it. Now, this is where we took a lot from last year in terms of people around the state were going, this is the best pasture growth I've ever seen in August. This is looking great. And King Island was one in particular, and the Northwest Coast, saying things are looking really good. And that was fantastic, especially coming off the previous year, the year that we just had, where we had one of our dry years, more difficult years. So grass is growing, fantastic. But it really gave us, going further into the season, really gave us a great indication of going, well, if we got pasture growth in August that we usually wouldn't have, what does that mean down the track? So we think maybe because we started in August to end at the same time, but what we actually saw is our growing window wasn't expanded, it was just shifted. So the growing window didn't change. What it did is shift. And if we have a look at last year, we're looking pretty similar this year as we were last year. So take that as a bit of an indication of where's this season going? What am I looking at? And the other thing that I look at last year, if we didn't get that December rain at the start of December, so I think it was the 1st of December, we got that rain, we would have been in big trouble. All right. So I look at that and go, use this as a bit of an indication. We're doing similarly soil moisture, but not just we're at the same point, but a very similar pattern. So that's something really to look on. So if you think back to last year, start to think, what were the things that worked for me? What were the things that didn't work for me? And are they potentially things that I can do again, or levers that I can pull this year that will help me if this season progresses like last season's did? So if we go down to South Rona, same thing. There was a bit of rainfall. It's a bit of a different soil type there, but it filled up a bit sooner. But again, we can see that pattern. That pattern's the important thing. That moisture is being used up. If we go across to the northeast, a bit of a different story here. So Winalea on some of those heavier soils. Similar, so not as much data in this part of the state, but we can see here we're a similar period, larger rainfall events. So yes, you're seeing wet patches around the place, but by no means are we in a wet state where this is conducive to pasture growth. So water will be used up. And then I've just overlaid Ringarooma. So what I like to do, I don't like to rely on data from one site. I will go and look at different sites around the region, and I'll just pick out the ones that are usually my champion sites for the region. But then I'll look at other sites. If you look at Ringarooma compared to Winalea, Ringarooma's had a bit of a heavier soil type in this region, but it is actually very similar in terms of there. So if we go across the Cananga, which is a farming forecaster site on heavier soil, on lighter soil and on sand, we're looking quite a bit drier out there. So we haven't actually hit our winter refill point in that part of the state, up around that far northeast. So last year it was pretty similar tracking to where we were last year, but we got rains this time last year that got us up to that full point. So not only are we not at that full point, but yeah, pasture's being utilised as well. And then I've pulled up one from West Wyambul, which is closer to the coast. So we're showing that we're still not at that full point. So that last year that rainfall there, we can see that filled the profile up. So we're not quite at that full point there. So that it gets if you're not at full point, but if you're at a normal full point, for lack of a better phrase, we get waterlogging, which slows things down. We haven't got to that, so it exacerbates the plant water use. And then I've put up another one close by, which is on heavier soil, and same thing. We haven't hit that full point. So compared to those northwest coasts where we hit full point up to here, and we stay waterlogged for a bit, we haven't even hit full point. So that's something to really take into consideration in that northeast part of the state, and where that water's being utilised. So if that means you've got a heavier soil type, what you then have is you don't have that subsoil moisture that you might rely on in other years. So that can have an impact when it comes to irrigation later down the season. But I'll touch on that later in the webinar. So if we go on further down south to the northern Midlands, we can see here things are tracking really similarly to where they were last year and the previous year. But again, there is growth around on those on pastures. And Hagley, this one here, there's been a change in site, but so this line should be a bit further down here. But again, we're looking at this going, we're very similar where we were to last year, but but again, that pattern's an important part. So Bishopsburn, similar in terms of where we are, but again, it's this period here. It's this period here that meant that pasture wasn't put into a dormant state. It's this period here where we're not full, where pasture's growing in August. So August is that really canary in the coal mine month for us in terms of how things are looking. And then if we go a bit further down south, again, that last rain that we had in September through that Longford, in between Longford and Campbelltown, it was only this last rainfall that actually got us close to that full point, and you could argue that we're not quite there. So yes, things are looking wet at the moment. I just came back from driving through Ross this morning, and there's puddles everywhere, and the flat paddocks that have just been sown or have got the cereals in there that have been sown in the last few weeks, they're looking wet and they're looking sorry. But as I was driving through just south of Cressy, one side to the left of me, there was some wet paddocks, and to the right of me, there was some paddocks that had pasture on a slope that were, they don't necessarily have that subsoil moisture that we would at this time of year. So again, don't use those visual cues. Try and use the data and try and understand how that soil moves within the landscape and how that interacts with that plant that's in there at the moment, that crop that's in there at the moment, and where that water use phase would be at at that time. So if we go further down the Midlands, this is where the story starts becoming a bit different. So Lewisham, which is south of Campbelltown, we can see here where we're still low down on where we are compared to that full point that we hit last year. So that September rain was actually pretty good through that Midlands, but we haven't had anything like that so far this year. And then Rathani, which is down at Tunbridge, that Woodbury area, not much in terms of that rainfall filling the profile up. And this site here and these sites down here give us a really good indication of if you've had that prolonged dry period, how that can have an ongoing effect in terms of we have a dry year, you have the pastures don't persist or they get grazed a bit too hard because you just don't have the feed. You expose your soil surface. So that surface of the soil exposed to wind and sun, so that can decrease your infiltration through to crusting or hydrophobicity, and so that decreases your infiltration. So then any subsequent rain you do get isn't as effective as it could be, say, come through the middle of winter where you've got good canopy cover. So and again, I don't like to rely on one site, so I've got another site which is about 15 kilometres as the crow flies, and we can see here these two sites are showing fairly similar in terms of where they are relative to the same time last year. So yeah, that part of the states is quite dry. The other reason why I put up this site was how soils behave. So some soils infiltrate from the top down and some infiltrate from the bottom up. So if we look at this site here, any rainfall that we get, we can see we've got that progressive infiltration from 10, 20, 30, 40, and that's how we think that soils, how soils feel in a textbook sense. Now, anyone who's been to my workshop knows that I bang on about this quite often. But then if you look at this, so very not far in terms of distance, but you can see how all the rainfall we get, it bypasses that 10, that 20, and that 30. And this is a soil that cracks. So this soil here fills from the bottom up as opposed to the previous soil that fills from the top down. So that's really important to know and to understand, particularly in autumn. So then you know, well, what's my rainfall worth to me? Is this part of an autumn break or is this part of a winter refill? In this case, this is still winter refill. I mean, only now are we getting into is that water in this part, in a cracking soil, only in this part of the state, only now is water getting into the profile that it is in that, that top 30 centimetres for root growth. And even then you can see here, now I'm getting a bit technical, but you can see that big spike there. This water just bypassed that part of the probe there because the crack the soil matrix where that part of the probe is or the crack is hasn't got wet enough for that sort of swell and to maintain water. It just bypasses to the lower levels. And had a special request for some more Southern Midlands or some Midlands data. I think hopefully the person that sent that request in, this site is quite close, and we can see here this is following a very similar trend in terms of where we're sitting in stored soil moisture in this part of the state. One thing that I would like to do is to put more of these traffic light system for this graph. So you can see where that lack of moisture is, but the lack of moisture, as you can see, is that subsoil. So yes, this soil fills from the top down. So we're getting a bit more moisture there, but it's that subsoil moisture that we're not getting. So that's really important in terms of understanding how long your pasture will persist based on available soil moisture. So you might dig a hole now in your top 30 centimetres and everything looks good, and you might compare that to the same time last year, which is here. And you say, well, it looks the same as it was last year. Everything should behave the same. It's understanding what's happening further down in the profile that gives you an indication of, yes, my pasture everything looks the same. If I dig a 30 centimetre hole, my pasture's behaving the same. So everything should be the same, but it's then this lack of soil moisture at depth is what then drives how long your pastures persist in the event of our spring, fizzling out in terms of rainfall variability. Then if we go to the East Coast and the Fingal Valley, down through Milton, they had some rainfall through July and August that some of the other part of the states didn't get. So they're sitting fairly similarly in terms of soil moisture, but that's being used up. I'll pull on the Kelvedon site as well because that's a soil similar to Warringah in the Midlands. That's cracking soil that you can see here behaves very, very differently. So we're now slowly filling up those. So, we're slowly getting repetitive wetting fronts within those top 30, 40 centimetres, and we're sitting at about where we were same time last couple of years. Then if we go into the Fingal Valley, they had a couple of years which were a lot drier than the rest of the state, and then also they got rainfall amounts through summer, as you can see here and here, that were localized thunderstorm events. But the problem was, because we'd gone through such a dry period the previous year, and they didn't get the spring rain that a lot of the other states the state got, that those thunderstorm events weren't as efficient. Yes, there was infiltration, but not as much as the numbers would suggest. An 80 centimetre rain, a couple of 80 centimetre rainfall events would suggest that, we're looking pretty good. But the fact that they're a high instantaneous application rate, so they don't necessarily match the infiltration rate of your soil, and that we're coming off a couple of dry seasons, means that infiltration rate wasn't as great. Now, this is the kind of stuff in our workshops that we drill down a bit more into to help you understand what does that data mean to you, or I guess what's the rainfall worth to you in your soil type. So we can see here we've got a couple of rainfall events that came through. So we're not quite as wet as we could have been, and the Fingal Valley hasn't been since 3 or 4 years ago. So we can see here they've been below average for a lot of those 3 years, and that's been mainly driven by a lack of subsoil moisture. So they're drying off a lot sooner than they would otherwise. If we go to Speyside, which is a bit closer to the Midlands Highway, a bit further west, we can see here again showing that similar position in terms of where we're sitting. That's our soil moisture that we can get to. We briefly got there last year, which was a bit of a blessing, but we're tracking similarly there. So if I look at this, I'd say this is how we usually start. This is similar to 2 years ago, where we had that really poor year coming into last year. So that's where I look at where we're sitting. If we sit at a median rainfall, we're never going to hit our full point. We have to get a much wetter than our average spring to get up to that point. But if things trend as they did 2 years ago, where are we looking? So these are the kind of things that we need to look at in terms of going forward. You know your region better than most. You know your farm better than anybody, and also you know what you did. So that record keeping is really important when it comes to understanding what this data means to you. It's all well and good to go, oh, it's the same time as it was. It's the same period as it was 2 years ago, with the same moisture as it was last year. But unless that can drive you to making specific decisions that improve your farm management, all it is really just an interesting topic of conversation. What we really want to try and drill down to is go, righto, this is the information we got. What can I do to make sure that I maximise the understanding of the information? So anything like that, I'm more than, if you want to email me, give me a call, anything like that, I'm really happy to chat about that kind of stuff, because for me, it gives me a greater understanding about how we can take this data and this information and bring it forward to a decision-making tool for you guys. So if we go into the Doong Valley, and again, this is quite different for those guys who are up the north of the state. So if we look at Dungrove, which is just north of Bothwell, on a sandier soil, so wind-blown sand. We can see last year we got rain. This rain that we got at the same time last year was fantastic for Bothwell, and it really kicked things off after a really dry year or two. But again, similar to that Fingal Valley, we are sitting similar to where we were off that same time 2 years ago. So if we look at not the last growing season, but the previous growing season, we're sitting similar in terms of a similar point in terms of available soil moisture. So that's one, again, to assess that and go, well, what levers did I pull? What things did or didn't work 2 years ago? These are the things I'm going to be starting again. And ideally, what we'd be doing would be picking that up here. All right, we'll be picking that up in this time and going, well, what's our corresponding observations that I can see here? So hopefully you can make an early decision, or do things to equip yourself to make a decision when you need to do it without finding yourself short. So if we then go to Weatheron, which is pretty much in Bothwell, again, it's that similar point. So I don't like using single point starters, so I'll go around and have a look at all the data available tools that I have, and they can tell me that Bothwell is sitting in that very, very similar condition. And it's not just subsoil moisture. So in parts of the states where, in say the northeast, where we haven't quite hit that 4 point, it's that subsoil moisture that's lacking. Whereas in this case, through these last two sites, it's subsoil and topsoil. So this is not contracting our how long our pastures can hold on for. This is affecting our pasture growth right now. And the reason for that, yes, this is a soil that fills from the top down, but soils don't behave the same way as when they're wet as they do when they're dry. So what we need is a consistent rainfall, low instantaneous application rainfall events that happen over a period, such as similar to this, but longer, that helps you wet the profile up, helps you wet up those macropores and micropores, so your soil gets the ability back to hold on to that moisture as it moves through the profile. We just simply haven't had the sustained rainfall period that has got our soil back to a winter type soil. So again, where's that moisture sitting in the profile? Yes, we're low, but this is not subsoil moisture that's lacking. This is moisture throughout the profile. So this has implications for us right now in terms of sowing any new crops or our pastures, how soon they're going to kick on. So on to that, we're doing TAS Farmers are doing a roadshow next week in Bothwell. So Sophie Folders organised that. We've got a few people speaking. So I'll be talking about this stuff in the Bothwell region, in that Doon Valley region, but also what that means for the cropping side of things. And then we've got some other fantastic speakers that could add even more value to that. So if you are in the Bothwell, Doon Valley, Southern Midlands regions, I really encourage you to come along to this. And hopefully we can get some value, and we can interrogate this data a little bit more. Then if we go further down south at the Coal Valley, if we look here down at Richmond, it's looking fairly similar to what we're doing Valley. So that spring rainfall that they got last year, we just haven't got. So who's to say that we're not going to get something similar in the next 2 weeks? But we're tracking similar to where we were 2 years ago. And if I pull up a site here at Stockdale, we are sitting above that point, so in between there. So that's a bit further north. So it's in between the Midlands Highway and Richmond. But again, we haven't had the rainfall through late winter, so early and late winter as we would usually hope, and none of those southeasterlies have come through. But also, I want to pick this one up because I love data, and I like seeing things that are happening that we just don't necessarily understand what's happening. And now this graph's a funny one. If we look here, this is our high point and this is our low point in terms of soil availability. So this was that really dry year that we had. And we can see here, by definition, that's our minimum plant water availability. But we can see here that last year, the plants drew out a lot more moisture. So that was our new plant water availability. And you go, well, what's happening there? What's going on there? What happened was, and we had a couple of sites that did this. What happened was that we had such poor winter, this period here, this winter 2 years ago, we had such poor winter refill in that year that what happened was we didn't have, so when plants grow roots don't look for water. Plants are growing roots, and this idea of what's above the ground is below the ground is a myth. Plants will grow more. Again, I'll get Fiona in the next office. She'll throw something at me for just going off in a tangent. But I was in the Murray 2 weeks ago putting some farming forecaster sites in, and as part of that, we're digging an 80 centimetre deep hole to do a soil characterisation. And it was a cereal crop, which was probably about 6 inches high at the time. And the farmer came along and he had a bit of a look and goes, so I dug the hole. How's it looking? It's down there anyway. So it looks like, soil's looking actually really good. It had some nice rainfall. You've got roots down at 60 centimetres, some good roots. He's like, no, I don't. Yeah, you do. Yeah, no, it can't be. The plant's only this high. It's what's above is what's below. So I said, no. So I took a chunk of soil out from about that 60 centimetres, and it had a beautiful live root there and a root from the previous season there. And so for him to and explaining to him, how roots grow in the soil. So what happens is plants don't look for water, and just because your crop might be 3 inches high or 6 inches high, it doesn't mean that's you only got 6 inches of roots. Your plants send roots down. They're like little ducks. They sit on the water and they don't look like they're doing much, but they're going flat stick underneath. They're paddling underneath. So roots grow when they can, and they grow when they've got low penetration resistance in the soil. So they have the ability to actually push through the soil, and that's tightly associated with soil moisture. So the more soil moisture you have, the lower the penetration resistance, the greater ability for plants to grow roots. So after this conversation with the farmer in the Murray, he goes, oh, maybe we should get the excavator out and start digging some holes around the place. That was music to my ears. Dig more holes, dig deeper holes. So understanding overcoming these assumptions are part of what I want this data to really do. So anyway, coming back from that tangent, I look at this 2 seasons ago, and that winter, we just didn't get enough winter refill. We just got poor winter refill. So this is where at the same time that year, and this is what we're coming into that year. So because we had our soil moisture was so low, our penetration resistance was low, so our plants didn't have the ability to put roots down. So that really reduced so yes, we got a little bit of rain through that summer, but the plants just didn't have the root architecture or the root depth to utilize that. We got some nice wetting through that winter period. We got here, which I assume is our maximum full point. I still don't know. I don't actually have the confidence to say we're at that full point for this part of the state because we just haven't had the probes in for long enough. But because we'd got to that point there, that difference there, we now had more moisture in the profile. Our penetration resistance was decreased, was less. Our penetration resistance wasn't as high, and so the plants had the ability to put roots down further, so they could extract more of that moisture in that profile. So this is a really interesting one, and understanding how that looks in terms of what that means for us in terms of going forward, not just for where we are now, but how that affects the season. So if you look at that and say, well, how's that going to affect the persistence of my pastures? And so, as I said, I don't like using single point data. If you look at these 2 graphs here, I've pulled another one out of the Duant Valley. We can see that exact same, the Coal Valley, we can see that exact same pattern. And we're sitting fairly similar. This one's actually, is sitting a bit lower. So I look at that and go, this is a bit of an early warning. And this is on a side of a hill. So on your drier banks, they probably won't persist in terms of soil moisture. And I think I pulled that graph up just to explain that, but I think I'll explain it already, so I don't need to bang on any more about it. Now, one of the requests I got, and in any future webinars, I think there's a tab there where you can do any specific questions. Please make the most of it, not just so you can get any specific questions answered, but for me, for me to understand the data that's useful for you guys. I don't want to be sitting in my own little echo chamber just banging on about the things that I like to bang on about. The more questions you can send me, I can then get some specific data. And one of the questions I had was plant available moisture in the Coal Valley. Now, the person it came from, I assume it was in terms of grapes. And this is an interesting one. I'll just touch on it briefly. But to answer your question, the short answer is I don't know. If you're talking about, so in terms of dry land, we've got some examples there, and we're probably sitting at about 75% of plant available moisture, less in some parts. But if you're looking at a vineyard or any kind of irrigated crop, it kind of distorts or mucks up what we're looking at. So I've pulled, this is one of a vineyard site within the Coal Valley, and we can see here we've got to that full. So that full point is not a full point in terms of water holding capacity. That's up there. That full point's what we want to irrigate to. So disregard that full point. But what this means is the fact that we've got, and this is how soil infiltration and how a soil behaves earlier in the season can have long-lasting impacts throughout the season. So in terms of if it was a dryland site, we would have probably just gone like that, and that would have drawn up the moisture profile, and it would have created greater preferential flow. It would have created greater hydrophobicity within those pores. But in an irrigated environment, we go through this wetting and drying cycle, so we haven't gone through that extreme. Yes, we've hit a low point, but we haven't hit that extreme as much. So then any subsequent rain that we get through winter is more effective. It's being more effectively grabbed by those soil pores, I guess you can say, as that rainfall falls. So to use dry land in irrigated environment can be a bit misleading. But yeah, so if you want to do it, this is okay. Here's a salesman coming out and be buy a moisture product. There you go. No, it's just but understanding how the soil can differentiate how the soil behaves in an irrigated environment as opposed to a dry land environment is important when you're trying to interpret this data and see what it means. Flinders Island, we'll go up to the island. So if we look at Happy Valley, which is just outside of the capital there, and we've on pretty much beach sand, we're sitting similar to where we were same time last year. Moisture's been used up though. And in terms of this site, on the sandy site, we understand we've got a fairly small bucket because sand has a low water holding capacity. If we go north of the island in some of the heavier soils, we can see here that with those rainfalls there, that's beautiful. You look at this consistent rainfall event, that's the kind of rainfall that we want to improve, to get to that maximum soil moisture. So I'm pretty comfortable here in that northern parts of the states where we've got some of that, the island where we've got those heavier soils that we're sitting at full point, and it's been used up. A little bit of period here where we're sitting wet, but it's been used up. So as soon as we don't get subsequent rainfall, that'll be used up pretty quickly. If we go across to King, it's a bit of a tale of two halves from what I've seen and heard on the island. If we look at Egg Lagoon, which is on our semi-coastal country, we're at a similar point as we were last year. So this is one where I really go, what did you do last year that worked? Now, I look at this and I'm going, I don't even know if this is our full point. Based on what last season, but I look at that and go, what did you do last year that worked? So phytoconservation, using the moisture now, because especially in a ryegrass pasture, if it's starting early, I wouldn't bank on it lasting. There's no free lunch. If it starts early, it's most likely going to finish early. And again, if we didn't get that December rainfall last year, it would have been pretty dire. So I look at that and go, look at that phytoconservation, look what you can do to bank your feed as much as you can, because if you're going to rely on that seasonal rainfall, you want to make sure you get something like this, or potentially two of those if you feel short of feed last year. So if you go down Pagara, so on your Pagara loams, we're sitting fairly similar to where we were last year. But you can see usually in King Island, it will be wet up here and just wet the whole way through, and we will be wet now. That would have flatlined, but we haven't seen that yet in this data. But this is that similar trend. So yes, we're at that full point, but similar to some of the other sites in the northwest coast, the moisture's been used up. That August pasture growth is a really good canary in the coal mine. And then if we go to Linwood, which has had more rainfall and a heavier soil type, and we've got shallow soils as well, because we've got coffee rock sitting underneath in some points, it's a bit of a bigger bucket. So we filled it up quicker. But again, we can see it's not flatlining. We can see we've got that growth there. So King Island is pretty similar at the same time it was last year for a lot of the island. And so that's all the dryland sites around. So, but I thought I'd grab this off the bomb to show you where the bomb thinks we're sitting in terms of in rainfall for the next 3 months. So it's looking positive. So a couple of months ago, we were pretty much sitting on 50th percentile. So business as usual, whereas now hopefully we're looking to get a little bit more than what we should. But again, I think the soil moisture and the early spring, yes, this is more greater than our median, but the early spring means that it's probably cancelled out if we do get this rainfall. So just be aware of that. So we've got, I really like to talk too much. We've got I think it was 45 minutes, but I'll just go through this fairly quickly because we've got another 5-10 minutes to go. What I want to talk about briefly is when to start. Now, this is something that I want to go more in depth in the next webinar because I wouldn't have thought things would change too much in terms of a dryland sense. So we can talk about this a lot more in the next webinar, but I'm just going to go through a few things, and those who have been to my workshops again would have heard me banging on about this. But essentially when we start, it does come up faster than we think because we often start too late because of the visual cues we use. Now, this is the wet part of the paddock because it's where we drive through to get to it. There's no there's no grass there, or there's no plants there. So the water's not being used up by plant use. It's just sitting there and it's only being evaporated. There's poor soil structure, so it's not infiltrating. It's not going deeper down in the profile. So and we drive through it all the time. And so that's what we see. Or like this, puddles, we drive past it all the time. We drive through it all the time. So they're the things that kind of sit in our mind. And it's usually, and so we're following the wrong visual cues. And usually it's the stuff that gives us the shits that are the things we remember. So no one likes driving through a boggy paddock. And those flow-on effects can last all season. Hang on, I'm just got my slides in the wrong order. And so when I say they last all season, this here, and it's relevant of soil type in some situations. So this here is a beautiful red ferrocell and Hagley, and this was one which I like to use because it also highlights another thing that a trap we fall into is this was 2021, 2022, and that was a cracking spring. We had rainfall events that fell beautifully spaced out up until December. We didn't need to irrigate in the around that Hagley Launceston region. Usually we'd be irrigating around here, but we didn't need to. So I actually had more situations where lack of irrigation was an issue, because usually people were irrigating here, but we fell into a bit of a false sense of security because things kept raining, and beautifully, as it wasn't getting too wet. It was exactly what the plants needed, and this is a cereal, this one here. But the problem was when we had to get into irrigation season, in inverted commas, we were 2 months later, so our evapotranspiration was higher because our day length was longer, our temperature was higher. And so when things didn't take off, they took off with a bang. So we really got caught behind. But what I want to highlight in this one is this is our winter refill point, and I've touched on this point a few times so far today. This is our refill point there. This is the point at which our fill capacity, the point at which a soil drains to that lower level. We can see here, that's our maximum water holding capacity for the top 10 centimetres. All right, we can go with that. But if we see here, we got an irrigation event here that happened here that didn't get caught on the rain gauge annoyingly. But we can see here that the water went from the 10 and it drained to the 20. Now, theoretically, that should be fill capacity, but we know it's not, because we got to that point in winter. And we can see here with those subsequent irrigations, we never hit to that point. That was because we let this soil dry out to the point where it dried out in a flat line. All the plant available moisture was exhausted. And so those macropores and the pores went through a period where you get that hydrophobicity, or especially with the irrigation, which is very high instantaneous application rate, the soil in that top 10 centimetres lost the ability to grab hold of that water as it infiltrated through your soil. And we got a rainfall event here, quite a large rainfall event. We still didn't get there. We got a bit higher because your rainfall has a lower infiltration rate, but we just never got there. So irrigating too late, or if you irrigate too late, it lowers the capacity for your soil to maintain its water holding capacity. So we never got to that point in the 20 centimetres or the 30 centimetres through here, but then we did here, and then we lost our ability for it. The soil lost its ability to hold on to that moisture that was subsequently put on through irrigation. Now, this period here is when our plants are at our greatest evapotranspiration. Temperatures are higher, leaf area is greater, and here we're relying on moisture that, it's 60, 70 centimetres in the profile. Early irrigation is not, you might go, I don't need to irrigate, I've got plenty of soil moisture in the profile, but we're not irrigating in the next few weeks, depending what happens this weekend with this weather system. We're not irrigating we're not irrigating for the plant to maintain available water to the plant. We're irrigating to the soil. We're irrigating to help the soil maintain fill capacity for longer. So if we can irrigate through here to keep that topped up, you're going to have more of a reservoir or a larger bucket to draw upon later in the season. I put this slide up because I just came from Rowan Smith's TAS at Rowan Smith at TAS, his pasture 365 trial, and I was playing around with this stuff this morning and but I've touched on this, seeing yes, where our soil moisture is now. That's definitely not a full point after looking at this data, just understanding where that moisture is available. But I touched on that earlier on, so it's just been a reminder, just at that one. So when to start, it does depend on early or late planting. So for example, cereals, your earlier planting, they're going to be a greater leaf area index. It depends on your soil type, so what your infiltration, and as I said, we're not just irrigating to maintain plant available moisture, but we're trying to irrigate the soil to maintain its water holding capacity. We also want to irrigate to test irrigation efficiency. And what I mean by that is what's going on, what's going in. A couple of early irrigations that, provided that we're not going to get too wet, that means that what we can do is we can go, yep, I'm putting on a 10, 12 mil irrigation event, and I had to bed form this year, and so I've got a lack of soil moisture, soil structure. Let's just say I can irrigate, and I know if I irrigate my 10, 12 mils, I know what goes on, what goes in. Because if we only discover that in, late December, when Christmas is coming up, and you realise I'm putting on 12 mils, but only 6 of that's going in, that's too late. Your soil is already going through a change. So irrigating is not just to keep up with plant available moisture, or your crop water demand, is to maintain good soil conditions and also testing irrigation efficiency. And so when you think about that, we want to try and maintain the bucket as big as we can. So if we're looking at our early season crops, so anything like a carrot seed, pyrethrum, anything that's gone through winter that's had time to put it, especially on a season like this year, where we haven't sat wet for very long, it's had the chance to put moisture, to put roots down in the profile. And when I say hasn't sat wet, hasn't sat waterlogged. So it's been wet enough to get root penetration, but it hasn't been too wet to slow the plants down or root prune through the waterlogged conditions. Anything like that, or your winter's planted cereals that are kicking off already, they're early. They've got a bigger bucket, so we need to irrigate accordingly. Anything that's gone in a bit later, they've got a smaller bucket. So we can so in terms of irrigations, little and often is what we want to look through there. And this is the slide that I pulled off that I was talking about last year after that December rain that we got, especially for potato growers. That was kind of our second spring. Let's make sure we don't start irrigating too late. But also then understanding your evapotranspiration, so how that looks through the season. So this is our evapotranspiration. So this has a crop factor of 1. So this is, if you have a crop factor, say, let's say cereal at full canopy, or a potato, so a potato crop's probably about 1.2 at max canopy closure. But let's just say we're looking at probably, peak periods, we're looking at about at 6 to 7 mils a week. So if we look at, weekly irrigation in this time of the year, we're looking at 35 to 40 millimeters. But where we are at the moment, we're sitting there. But this is a great visualization to go, yes, you can be forgiven for standing in the middle of your paddock just going, it still feels like winter to me when the wind's blowing and it's chilly and everything looks wet. But just understand that this is our ETO there. And in a crop, this is how things are starting to ramp up based on the season, based on temperature, day length, and all those kind of things. So that's where we're sitting. And if I just grab that just before, this is where we're looking at Longford. So again, your August average, we're looking at about 2 millimeters per day of evapotranspiration. And remember, that's a crop factor of 1. And the last 7 days, we're already just ramped up that by, about 0.3 millimeters, and that'll just keep going up and up. But also understanding where your crop's sitting. So if you've got an early season crop, your crop factor is quite low, and that just ramps up. So your late season crops might be here, but making sure that you've got your soil in a condition that you can maintain your crop water demand in that period here. So I guess just to wrap it all up and the key takeaways. So similar in terms of the dryland soil moisture, similar soil moisture levels, but more importantly, and I think this is really key, is very similar refill patterns as the same time last year. The question I have for you in terms of the things you need to think about when we look at those refill patterns, did you have unseasonally good growth in August? And when I mean unseasonally, I don't mean it was the same as last year. I mean, is it what over the last 10, 15 years, would you call this unseasonal? If it was like last year, what does that mean for you going forward? If you've got an early spring, does that mean we're going to have an early summer and things are going to cut off early? So what does that mean in terms of phytoconservation for that feed window for you? So think about what worked for you last year, or more importantly, what didn't work for you. Can you tweak things by a couple of weeks that will make all the difference? Because something that I hear too often and it worries me, and I heard it last year, and my worry was founded was things are looking dry, but I hope we get good spring rain. Mother Nature doesn't work on hope. So let's look at the data. Let's look at the things. Hey, if you cut extra fodder and we get a cracking spring, I can't see that as a bad thing. So if we have a look at that, what worked for you and what didn't. All right. So that August is that canary in the coal mine. We shouldn't really have really good growth in August. It should be waterlogged. It should still be wet. And when to start irrigating, again, don't rely on visual cues. Go out there with the shovel, dig a hole in your wettest part, in your wetter than average part of the paddock. Go dig a hole in your drier than average part of the paddock. Have a look at the dirt, soil, have a look at it, and feel the difference. So you can get an understanding of your variability. Don't rely on the visually looking at the wet. I know we don't want to get out of our utes or tractors when it's raining and windy. But yeah, dig holes in variable parts of your paddock, your dry parts, your wetter parts, and do that comparison. So yeah, dig those holes and utilize the data and know your soil and record keeping. That's probably another one I should put that. Keep records, because data 3 years ago will be useless unless you know what you did. Because I'll give you the tip, we don't have long memories. And we had 2 cracking springs before we had that absolutely horrid dry year the year before last. And that was probably what compounded a lot of the things because what was in our memory. So just a bit of marketing here. This is the weather station network that we have around the place. So if you want to have this jump on and have a look at signing up on that, there's a QR code there, but you can jump on the website and have a bit of a look. If you'd like to email me, call me, text me, I don't care. More than welcome to get in contact if you've got any more questions or any suggestions or anything like that. Because like I said, the weather station network is there. We want to add value to the weather station network, and you're the people that are using the data. You're the people who are innovating with the data. If you can tell us the things that you find useful, we're more than happy to develop that to help you out there. And just one more plug for that TAS Farmers forum in Bothwell next week. Yeah, like I said, if you're in that Coal Valley, Derwent Valley, Southern Midlands area, yeah, please come along because yeah, things are looking dry, a lot drier than the rest of the state, and so it'd be great to hopefully not just add some more tools to your toolkit and a bit more understanding, but for people like me for you guys to educate me as well in terms of how we can utilize this data earlier than what we are. So I've only got 7 minutes overtime, so I'm doing pretty well for me. So but thank you for logging on. Please, if there's others that haven't come on, let them know that there's a recording. And yeah, we'll be, like I said, this is the first of a series of 8. So yeah, please register as you see them pop up, and yeah, please utilize the questions part of the sign on. So yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, have a great weekend.